flagship program in this state, right? And
a bullshit, a bullshit, a bullshit, a bullshit.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another edition of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports, episode 62 to be exact. Yes, indeed, I counted them up, and this is episode 62. Welcome back, live from Houston, Texas, Wednesday, May 8th, right around 9:50 p.m. Thank you if you're tuning in live. If you're new to the channel, make sure you like and subscribe, and refer us to your friends who like sports, especially if they are Texas Longhorn fans. On tonight's show, we've got more college basketball transfer portal action for 5 different programs. In our last episode, which is actually getting some really good numbers right now, we covered Kentucky, we covered Arkansas, we covered Texas, we covered UConn, we covered Kansas, we even covered some of Michigan's moves. Today, we're going a little bit different direction. It's a mix of all different conferences, but there have been some big moves over the past 5 or so days since our last episode. We'll be covering all of those moves. Then we're going to get into kind of a player deep dive. Texas has signed one of the better high school prospects in the country in Trey Johnson for the 2024 recruiting class in basketball. We're going to watch some of his film live here on this episode, kind of dissect his game and go deep into what his role will actually be on this Texas roster next year and how good can he be next year. Can he be the best player on this team potentially? And then finally, Joel Klatt recently, as like early as Monday, released his post-spring football top 25 with all of the transfer portal additions taken into account up until this point. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to react a little bit to his post-spring top 25. So hope you guys enjoy the show. Make sure you engage with us in the chat if you would like. And joining me live from Austin, Texas, a busy man himself. Both of us, big sports fans, big Longhorn fans. Mr. Emmy Nixon, what's up?
Nothing much, man. Caught a bit of Knicks Pacers from earlier. That was a pretty good game. But man, I think Trey Johnson, what we're gonna get into tonight, I think is a episode that's long overdue. From the moment that we signed this kid, I think the hype that came about, I think it's almost to the point where I would have expected it to be a little bit more than what it is. Like this is a big time recruit, big time player that we brought in.
Absolutely. We'll get into that in the middle of today's show. Again, thank you guys for tuning in. We greatly appreciate it. Go check out some of our other content here on the channel. We put it out pretty regularly now, 3-4 times a week, especially with all that's going on right now. You would think it'd be kind of a not so busy time of year, but when you cover pretty much all the sports like we try to do here on the Raw Prospect Podcast YouTube channel, when you're covering the pros and the college game, and you're covering football, basketball, baseball, golf, and some other sports as well, it never gets not busy around here. There's never a dull moment. So with that being said, let's get into our first segment tonight. Yes, indeed, people. It's your favorite time. It's Portal Nuggets. It's time to go and talk about some big moves that have been made over the past week in college basketball through the transfer portal, which we know is kind of like the wild, wild west nowadays, especially in college basketball. We have 5 programs tonight. We've got St. John's and Rick Pitino, who are making noise. We've got Arizona. We've got Baylor and Scott Drew. they've made 2 huge pickups. We've got Gonzaga and Mark Few, who have gotten in on the action, and we've got Alabama off its Final Four appearance, still awaiting a decision from Mark Sears, who is testing the NBA waters, but they have picked up some really good players in the portal as well. Emmy, where do you want to start? Which program?
I think let's start with St. John's. They made a interesting move picking up a point guard from East Carolina, a microwave scorer in Kadari Richmond. I think this team, Rick Pitino teams are typically, known for their defense, but in this era of college basketball, you got to have guys. Well, in any era of college basketball, even more so now, though, I think you got to have vets who can just flat out shoot the ball and put the ball in the basket. And as many of those guys you can get on your team, the better.
Yeah, this is a St. John's program that in year one under Rick Pitino, I think there were some lofty expectations that may have been a little bit unfair to the situation that they were in last year when it came to a athleticism and skill standpoint. Now they figured it out towards the end of the year. They were playing some good basketball, and aside from a couple losses to UConn down the stretch, they were they played well, but they've significantly upgraded the talent already on this roster to the point where I think they're going to be a top 20 preseason ranked team, considering that I think they're going to add another piece or two. I think they still need a piece at the 4 or the 5 to improve the depth there. But the moves that they have made, I think, puts them in the conversation to be a preseason top 20 team. Now, with Kadari Richmond from Seton Hall, he was first team All Big East player last year. A 6'6" combo guard who's built like an NFL middle linebacker. Seriously. I mean, he kind of reminds me of Anthony Edwards in a way. He's not as athletic. He's not as twitchy, but he's built like Anthony Edwards. And when you talk about all Big East first team guards, those things don't grow on trees. And the fact that Rick Pitino was able to get him to St. John's, as he is a New York City kid, so it does make sense. But, St. John's and Seton Hall are big rivals. And we're seeing it more and more now in the days of NIL, but it's not often that you used to see players go from Auburn to Alabama or Seton Hall to St. John's or vice versa or Texas to Oklahoma, right? Now we're seeing a little bit more of that. And with Kadari Richmond, what he's going to give them defensively, what he'll give them in attacking downhill, along with his playmaking ability, like averaging 7 assists per game last year at Seton Hall, was the facilitator of that offense. He's got good size. He can guard multiple positions on the perimeter. He was arguably, I think, a top 5 player in the portal this year. He entered it late. He decides to go to St. John's. I think he fits the Rick Pitino system perfectly. The missing aspect from his game that's prevented him from being in the NBA right now is the perimeter shooting. He's not a great perimeter shooter yet. Rick Pitino wants to help him develop into that. And I think if he can get closer to shooting like 35% from 3 rather than what he has been, which is like a 27% shooter from beyond the arc, that's going to elevate him to potentially an all-American kind of level, not just a all-conference kind of level. But regardless, St. John's did not have a player as good as Kadari Richmond last year, and he was just the start of what they did. I
Yeah,
liked
I
the
think
other.
if
Go
he
ahead.
even if he doesn't get to that 35% number, just showing a little bit more like off ball feel with cutting and off ball movement, that would even help his game and his stock as well.
Yeah. It didn't stop there though. They added a couple more pieces. They added a guard, Davon Smith from Utah, who started his career a couple other places, finally transferred to Utah, and last year averaged 13 points per game, was really productive in the Pac-12, averaged 7 assists per game and 6 rebounds per game, and he shot 40% from three. Now, in the prior years, he wasn't nearly that as a three-point shooter. So I want to see him kind of continue that consistency from beyond the arc. But when you look at these two guards, you got speed with Davon Smith, who's great at attacking downhill. He's also solid defensively. He's got the size. Both of them do to be good defensively. And that's something that I think Rick Pitino was looking for in particular, was guys that are going to come in and have not only the size and the athleticism to defend on the perimeter and to be switchable and versatile, but the want to play in his system, because it is a demanding system defensively. If you remember, Rick Pitino went viral for calling out his team just this past year for being not athletic enough, in their side-to-side lateral movements on defense. And I think that's particularly what he's trying to attack here. But with these two pickups, which I really, really like, it upgrades their level of skill and playmaking significantly. And I think it puts them in the conversation to be a top 20 caliber team, because I think this duo, if they can figure out how to kind of juggle the balance of playing with one another, as it is, two ball dominant kind of guards, which I think they'll be able to do, like that could be one of the more dynamic backcourt duos in college basketball next year, and it's not out of the question. They added another guard from North Texas who I'm pretty excited about. I watched a little bit of him. His name's Aaron Scott. So they added some. They went guard heavy. Now they need to go out and find, a versatile power forward that can score a little bit inside and help protect the rim. But I like what Rick Pitino is doing. They did add a center from USC who's on the younger side and has a couple more years of eligibility. I think that gives them depth, gives them some more size, but they still are, I think, a missing piece away from potentially even being like a top 15 caliber of team going into the preseason next year. So good for St. John's. Like, it would be great if Rick Pitino got this St. John's program going. It would be great for college basketball.
Definitely.
So with that being said, where do you want to go next? Arizona, Alabama, Baylor, or Gonzaga?
Let's shift over to Alabama, a team that made a deep run in the tournament, as we know, and I think Nate Oates has really started to, within college basketball. Obviously, he was known as a high level coach, but I think he started to his name has popped up even outside of college basketball circles, just as a up and coming coach, just within the basketball community as a whole. He picked up 4 different players in this cycle so far. 3 guards, 1 point guard from Auburn, which you alluded to earlier, a Auburn to Alabama move, very strange. But Aiden Holloway, 6'1", 178 pounds. Picked up a shooting guard from USF, Chris Youngblood, a 4-star, according to 24/7 Sports. Also picked up Houston Mallette from, I think he's from Princeton? Wait, I don't
Pepperdine.
quite remember where he
I
transferred
believe
from.
he's I believe he's from Pepperdine. But
Pepperdine. Yeah.
yes. And then they also picked up Cliff O'Maury, who, in my opinion, was the biggest move. And let me really quickly explain why. Cliff O'Maury from Rutgers was arguably the best shot blocker in college basketball last year at the 5. He's an elite shot blocker and rim protector. He's going to do a lot of the dirty work on the inside. He's going to rebound efficiently. And he's a guy who can catch the ball and put it in the basket around the rim. He's not really going to be a guy who's going to create his own shot. But the reason it's such a perfect fit in Alabama's system is because that's not what he needs to do. They don't need their 5 to be a high-level scorer that can stretch the floor. Alabama their team is built to do that. They're built to score 80, 90 points per game, like we've seen the past couple of years. The reason picking up Cliff O'Maury is so important is because he's going to elevate their defense, not just from a rim protecting standpoint, but just overall having those guards having the ability to know that they have someone at the rim that is an elite rim protector. They have kind of that second line, that final line of defense, I think is going to help them defensively. And if this Alabama team is just average defensively, like if they can keep some games in the 70s rather than having to score 90 or even 100 points some nights, that's just going to make this team even more dangerous.
Yeah.
You think about what they have coming back, I think there's a good chance that they're going to get Mark Sears back. He was an All-American caliber player last year. You get him back for another year. You pair him with Chris Youngblood, who was an excellent guard for South Florida last year. He can shoot it from the outside. I mean, pretty much everyone that Alabama targets can shoot the ball. That's what NATO's system is. But I like that. I like the Aiden Holloway pickup. He's younger. He's got years of eligibility. He can stay in this Alabama system, develop. He can be the guy after Mark Sears. Maybe Mark Sears goes off to the NBA after next year. He's a pretty decent shooter. You have Grant Nelson coming back. That's huge. He's your kind of stretch 4 wing type who absolutely went nuts in the tournament this past year.
Yeah. Fun fact about Youngblood. I think he was the kid in that Uncle Drew Pepsi commercial back in the day.
Yeah, this along with some of the other pieces they have coming back. Like I right now I would have Alabama in my preseason top 3 as long as they get Mark Sears back. I think they're right up there with Kansas, with teams like North Carolina, Iowa State, teams that are going to be ranked really highly going into next year with the pieces that they have, upgrading defensively with Cliff O'Maury from Rutgers. Nate Oates is building a monster in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm mentally prepared for Alabama to be good at basketball every year. I don't know if I'm ready for that, but we have it regardless. So let's continue. Let's head over to Waco, or as I like to call it, Wacko, for a little bit of Baylor talk. Go ahead and start with Baylor. I don't have their recruits pulled up just yet, or
Yes,
transfers.
Baylor may have won the portal. They only have 2 additions, but they may have won the portal. They go out and get Jeremy Roach from Duke, who, if you remember, 2 years ago was Duke's most dynamic playmaker on the offensive end on their run to the Final Four. The Final Four in which they lost to North Carolina in Coach K's last game. He was arguably their best player on that run. He's a guy who has a ton of experience. He's not going to be phased at all by playing in the Big 12. He's played in monstrous games over the course of his career. He started 108 games over the last 4 years. He's a fifth-year senior. He'll fit perfectly in this Scott Drew system as just kind of the guy that has to run the offense with a lot of the talent that they're going to have coming back. Average 10 points per game, 3 assists. His pure volume numbers don't blow you away, but he's just a very solid point guard, smart, high basketball IQ, is going to play defense, high character. And the most important part of this is last year he shot 43% from three. He's a really nice spot up 3-point shooter. Great get out of the portal, and it didn't stop there. They went out and added arguably the best power forward in the portal in Norchad Omier from Miami. If you remember, 2 years ago, or I guess it would have been last year, not this past year, but last year, when Texas faced Miami in that Elite Eight game, the team with Isaiah Wong and all those guys. Texas didn't have Dessou, which probably hurt them in that game, but Norchad Omier really was a problem, especially on the glass for Texas in that game. He's only 6'7". He doesn't blow you away with his size, but he's strong, and he's arguably the nation's premier rebounder. 4 consecutive seasons averaging 10 or more rebounds per game. He's finished in his 4 years at Miami top 20 in the country in offensive rebounding percentage 3 of the 4 years, and top 30 in defensive rebounding percentage 3 of the 4 years. And to go along with all of that, he's a guy who averages 18 points per game. He's a double-double walking double-double. He plays defense. I think Baylor, although they only made 2 additions with the high-profile freshman that they have coming in VJ Edgecombe, highly recommend you go watch his tape if you haven't already, if you're into this recruiting stuff that we'll get into with Trey Johnson here in a little bit. Baylor is going to be good again. Langston Love's coming back. We know Baylor, the past couple of years under Scott Drew, past half decade, have liked to run that 3-guard lineup, with a big on the inside. They're going to have the ability to do that again. I think they'll be a deeper team, even with the loss of a Jacoby Walters to the NBA draft. They're going to be good. They're going to be a top 10 team. They might not be top 5, but they're going to definitely be ranked top 10 in the preseason. Scott Drew is a top 5 coach in college basketball. He runs a great program. And you have some assurance now that he's going to be in Waco for the foreseeable future after he turned down a couple jobs a couple months ago after the season was over. So I think Baylor is one of the absolute winners of the portal. They didn't go out and get sheer volume. They only got 2 players, but the 2 players that they got speak for themselves.
Yeah. And Jeremy Roach is a box that's checked off the list in terms of being a national championship contender. We always talk about veteran guard play. That's one of the main things we always talk about. And if you're a college basketball fan, like Jeremy Roach, you're not going to do much better than that in terms of a decision maker and someone you can just trust down the stretch of games to, have your guys in the right spots and be able to execute.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's stay in the Big 12. Arizona is moving into the Big 12 here very soon. And first of all, the Big 12 is going to be if you thought it was good this past year, it might be even better next year. We'll get into more of the preseason top 10, top 15 rankings later on down the road once rosters are more filled out and complete. But just thinking big picture before we get into Arizona specifically, like for me, I would have 4 teams in like my top tier of the Big 12 right now. Those teams would be Kansas. Obviously, we talked about them last episode with what they return with DeJuan Harris, KJ Adams, Hunter Dickinson, the additions they made in the portal with, AJ Storr, all those guys that we talked about, right? Houston is going to be really damn good again. They haven't added a ton in the portal, but they only really lose Jamal Shed, who, don't get me wrong, is a big piece to replace. He was arguably the best point guard in the country last year. He was a first-team All-American caliber player. Of course, gets hurt in the Duke game. Houston maybe wins that game. If he doesn't, who knows? It's hard to say, but they go out and get a guard from Oklahoma who will do a plenty good job replacing him. They have LJ Cryer coming back. They've got Roberts coming back on the interior. They've got, I think, 3 or 4 of their 5 starters from last year coming back. And we know how good of a coach Kelvin Sampson is. Then you think about Baylor, who we just talked about, and Iowa State, who we haven't gotten to yet, but they return basically everyone important from last year's team. That was really good. And they've made some solid additions in the portal. We know how good of a coach that TJ Otzelberger is. That's my top tier. And it doesn't right now include Arizona, but Arizona's like the very next team because of what they've done in the portal. Just real fast. These aren't household names, but they're names that you are going to learn because they played in the mid-majors and they were very good players in the mid-majors. You may know Trey Townsend. He was on the Oakland team that beat Kentucky in the tournament. He was really good. He was the Horizon League Player of the Year. He averaged 17-ish points per game. He's got the physical build. It's kind of more of like a stocky shooting guard, small forward type that has the size to guard multiple positions. I think with what Arizona returns potentially with Caleb Love, Jaden Bradley, who's a younger player that you guys will get to know. Some of the younger guys they've recruited as they got to replace a guy like Umar Ballo on the inside. With how Tommy Lloyd has put together this team, they're going to be more physical and they're going to be good defensively. They're going to be really solid defensively. I think they're targeting physicality and defense and length so that they can go and compete with Houston and Kansas and all these other excellent squads in the Big 12. It's going to be probably a little bit of an adjustment, but Arizona absolutely has the talent on its roster to compete. Love the addition of Trey Townsend. And then they go out, I think it was yesterday or the day before, and they get Anthony Del Orso from Campbell, who nobody really knows, but he was one of the better wings in the portal. I think his role in this Arizona team is going to be shoot threes. He's going to be one of their knockdown shooters. He shot 38% from 3 last year. He's a really solid defender. As I said, size and defense is something that they're really going hard after. Averaged over a steal and a half per game last year, although at a lower level of competition, and averaged almost 20 points per game. Like, the kid can score. So you've got 2 solid wing players who can score the basketball, play defense, get downhill, are smart, well-coached players coming from good mid-major programs. and you surround them with Caleb Love, whose future is still kind of up in the air, but everyone kind of assumes that he's coming back for one final year. And then some of the other pieces that they've had in the program for quite a while now, along with some of the freshmen they've recruited. It's a good mix of portal guys, guys that have been in the program, guys they've recruited, and, some high-level high school talent. It's a mix of everything, which I like. So that's Arizona. And then Gonzaga, just really fast, and then you can give your thoughts. I think Gonzaga is going to be a team in the conversation to be in the top 10 preseason once again. They had depth issues last year. They didn't really have a go-to guy offensively last year. Nimhard's great as the point guard, but he's not like a high-level scorer that's going to go take over a game in the tournament. They only lose one guy to the draft. They return pretty much everyone else, and they go out and add Khalif Battle, who is from Arkansas. Made a couple starts prior to Arkansas, but he's got good size. He's scored 13 points per game last year. He's a solid player. He'll add depth behind Ryan Nimhard. He can shoot the three a little bit. And then Michael Ajayi from Pepperdine is a really nice wing who can shoot it a little bit and score it. I think you add that with Graham Ike on the interior, and Gonzaga is cooking with grease right now. They're going to be a good team. And it's not that they haven't been a good team. They've only gotten to 9 consecutive Sweet 16s, which is, when you actually think about it, it's pretty incredible. But yeah, I think outside of St. John's, which I think still will be a top 25 caliber squad going into the season with the moves that they've made, as we talked about, all these teams that we're talking about here are going to be, you're going to see them in the top 15 going into next year. And the team like, Arizona, Gonzaga might not be done adding just quite yet. There are still some big names out there. So do you have any thoughts on Arizona or Gonzaga before we switch gears?
Well, for one, I think I'm just excited to watch Arizona play more this upcoming year, just because in the Pac-12 I really didn't watch any of them during the regular season. I just don't have really the opportunity or the desire to stay up late for those types of games. So seeing them in the Big 12 will be nice. And then Gonzaga, I think, they've had a couple of quote unquote down years in a row, but like, I think Mark Few, like, people got to remember, you can't really count them out in terms of, making the Sweet 16. Like, that's pretty much the standard that they've had, even in their down years.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right. That is going to do it for Portal Nuggets tonight. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Thank you to the 5 that are tuning in live. Greatly appreciate that. I knew college basketball portal, for whatever reason, is hot on the streets right now. Let's talk some Trey Johnson. How about that? I'm excited for this. So as you guys maybe know, Trey Johnson is a consensus 5-star combo guard. He's really a shooting guard. Standing 6'5", 6'6", is arguably like the best scorer at all 3 levels. The most polished scorer in this recruiting class, outside of maybe Cooper Flagg, who's the number 1 overall recruit in the class and is going to play at Duke next year. But Trey Johnson, high level kind of player. His recruitment came down really to Baylor in Texas. He's a state of Texas kid. Played the last couple years of high school basketball at Link Academy, which is in Missouri. But he's really a Texas kid at heart. It came down to Baylor or Texas. He chose Texas and Rodney Terry, which is a big recruiting win for Rodney Terry. And I think the fact that Terry's been able to hold on to him has been just absolutely it's been a must have. He's a must have guy in the fold for 2024. He's a guy that, just speaking from a high level perspective, when you watch him on tape, which we'll get to here in a minute, he should be one and out. He should be 1 year at Texas, and then he should be a top 5 pick in next year's NBA draft. I think he's that good. So let me pull up his profile and some highlights here so that you guys can kind of get a better idea of who we're talking about. But again, 6'6", 185, 190, 5-star by pretty much every recruiting service you find, ESPN, Rivals, On3, 24/7. He's a top 10 national kid. He commits to Texas November 15th of last year, and we talked about him a little bit then because it was breaking news, but we really haven't discussed him since. We've kind of talked about almost every other aspect of this Texas basketball team, and we haven't really done a deep dive into arguably the best high school prospect that Texas has signed since Kevin Durant. So let me get to his little mixtape. While I do that, do you have any thoughts on Trey Johnson overall before we get to this?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is just like kind of that long, wiry frame that we've seen. We've seen a lot of this type of player into the draft, and I think people talk about wingspan a lot in terms of defense, but I think it helps on offense also, just from a ball handling standpoint, and just from also just being able to shoot over the top and have that higher release point. And Trey Johnson, I think he has like a +5 wingspan, if I remember right. So I think his scoring ability, I think it's completely translatable. It's just whether or not I think first game of the year we'll know like out of the gates like what to expect just from how his shot is whether his shot is dropping. It's just whether that shot's going to fall is going to depend on that's going to be the determining factor on whether he has a big year or not.
Yeah. So I'm getting this pulled up, and then I'll get it on the screen. I'll get it on the screen. All right. Let me make sure this is.
Let's see. All right. Average 5.6 rebounds per game. 80% from the free throw line. Scored a lot of his points there as well. All right, here we go. Here, go ahead and full screen it. Here we go.
Let's see if I can get to some more. Maybe this isn't the best highlight tape. Let me get to a better
Thanks for your patience, Al. We're working on it. Let's see here.
No, but I think, I have high expectations for Trey. I think he's gonna be a top 5 freshman next year. I expect him to immediately contribute, immediately start, make a big impact for Texas. Maybe this will work better here if it will go full screen. I don't know what's going on here. Probably should have thought this out better before we. Oh well. Yeah, I don't know why it's like this, but will they actually show some goddamn highlights? Jesus. I know he can shake hands with his teammates. Good Lord. Yeah, I mean, catching lobs. You see, like, his size will jump off the screen. Let's see where he's I hope they don't show all fast break highlights, but obviously he has the athleticism to go get up and get it. He's not really like, his athleticism isn't the thing that makes him special. It's his ability to score at all 3 levels. He's a very polished player. As you can see, like, very nice ability to score off the dribble, get to his spot, step back threes. You saw that a lot if you watched the McDonald's All-American game. Has a good handle, can back guys down the post, has a nice post game. He's just a very polished player.
What do you think is going to be his, biggest point of weakness, transitioning to the college game?
That's a good question.
For me personally, I think it's going to be a lot to do with his passing, whether he's able to make those reads. Because say he does have a hot night, they're going to send to the ball a lot more often than they would have in high school. So he's going to have to be able to be strong with the ball. And I'm not saying he can't do that, but it's definitely a transition in terms of, athleticism that you're going against.
Yeah. It is always a transition for freshmen, no matter how good they are. Again, I think it helps that, Texas is going to be playing in a good basketball league, the SEC, but it'll help a little bit that they're not going to be playing in the Big 12 with all those physical, hyper athletic, strong guards that can match up with his size. I think really his biggest challenge is going to be getting stronger, building out his frame a little bit. You can see he's kind of a skinnier kid, and that's pretty common for guys of his ilk. 6'6" combo guards. Once he gets in the weight room, though, I expect him to put on some muscle, and that will help him. And then just kind of, I guess, meshing with this Texas roster. They have something they didn't have last year, which is size on the perimeter, and they don't have to sacrifice size this year to have a good offensive lineup on the floor.
Yeah.
Whereas they kind of had to do that to an extent last year. I think a guy like Trayvon Mark is going to help Trey Johnson tremendously.
Yeah.
And then what Jordan Pope will bring as far as his ability to score off the dribble and facilitate will be huge. But you can just see, like, it's everything. It's step back threes. It's pull up jumpers from the mid range. It's the ability to read passing lanes and score on the fast break, beat players one-on-one, even, score over taller guys in the post with that kind of turnaround jump shot. It's pretty consensus. He is, maybe outside of one or two other guys, the best 3-level scorer in the entire high school class. I don't know that Texas wants a freshman to be their best player next year, but if there's going to be a guy that does it, it might be him, because I think he's legitimately going to be, if he pans out, he's going to be a top 10 pick in next year's lottery.
Yeah. And I think just the way he moves around the floor, just from watching these highlights, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Mikal Bridges. I don't know if that's like the perfect comparison, just because I think he's far more along as a scorer than obviously Mikal Bridges was at this point in his career. But just like the wiry frame, the wingspan, I think is very similar. Kind of the way he handles the ball, the way that looks, just because he has that long wingspan, kind of looks similar to how it does with Bridges.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a guy we're going to talk about a lot next year. There will be other guys too. Cooper Flagg at Duke will absolutely be getting a lot of headlines for all the right reasons. He's a special player. But this kid, I mean, it's going to be fun. It is going to be fun. And the best thing is Texas has held on to him so far. And we're to the point, if we can get through May into the summer and he's still committed, that's a great sign. And I don't see any other reason to suggest that he would even be thinking about decommitting from the Longhorns. So,
Yeah.
That's basically it on Trey Johnson. Do you have any other thoughts?
I mean, he knows how to create space in the phone booth. I think those little fadeaway jumpers, those post moves, I think that little spin jumper kind of from the elbow, I think that's kind of where he's going to operate. And the thing I think of with that is just like, I think spacing is going to be so important for him when he's on the floor. Just having that ability to operate and not have, guys digging down on him. But because if you're able to get him in space one on one, he's going to be able to put the ball in the bucket.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Okay. Well, for the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to talk some college football. So let me go ahead and reshare my screen. And we're going to be pulling up Joel Klatt, who's a lead analyst for Fox Sports. He does a podcast, but also is the lead color commentator for Big Noon Kickoff. He'll be doing the Texas-Michigan game when Texas travels to Ann Arbor, week 2 of the season, and a lot of big games, as he always does. I got it.
Okay.
Here's Joel Klatt's post-spring top 25. So before we give any sort of reactions or thoughts on this ranking, let's just go through it. So we have Ohio State number 1. We've got Georgia number 2. Texas number 3. Oregon number 4. Ole Miss number 5. There's your top 5. Utah, who's coming into the Big 12. Number 6 with Cam Rising coming back. Alabama with Kalen DeBoer. Number 7, Michigan. Number 8, the defending national champions. Penn State, number 9, and Missouri, number 10. And then you go outside the top 10, you've got Notre Dame, 11, Florida State, 12, Clemson, 13, LSU, 14, and USC with Lincoln Riley in the first year post Caleb Williams, 15. And then you have Tennessee, 16, Oklahoma, 17, Miami, 18, Oklahoma State, 19, K-State, 20, And then to finish it out, you got Arizona, Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, and Texas A&M squeezes in at number 25. So you take us where you want, man. Your initial reactions, what stands out to you about this particular ranking by our guy Joe Klatt?
Well, Notre Dame, I think, is an interesting team to talk about. I think with their roster that they've built there, I think that you could make an argument they should be higher. For me personally, I'm a believer in what Marcus Freeman is doing over there. I think they're going to have one of the best defenses in football. They've addressed the wide receiver position as we've talked about. So I think when it's all said and done, as long as they're able to get that, good level quarterback play, I think they'll be right there in the mix. So I think you're looking at probably 12 teams that, like the top 12 right now. Like, if you told me these 12, like 8 of them are going to be in the playoff come the end of the season, I wouldn't even bat an eye at it. But it's just always an interesting exercise. It never ends up being what you think it is. That's all there really is to it.
For Notre Dame in particular, because they're kind of in a unique spot still, given they're not really in a conference, and we're now expanding to a 12-team playoff where the conference winners get automatic bids. It's an interesting spot to be in for Notre Dame. But when you look at what Notre Dame has, they get one of the better quarterbacks in the portal, and Riley Leonard, who was really sought after, but knew where he wanted to go once he entered the portal. His only really downside has been the injuries and the ability to stay on the field the past couple of years. He's an excellent player, though, with his athleticism, and I like the way he throws it. The interesting thing for Notre Dame is they've always had good offensive lines. They're always good enough defensively. They can play in a lot of different types of games. Are they good enough at the wide receiver position? That's really been a question for the past 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
They haven't had a receiver with 500 yards since 2021.
Their main receiving targets have basically been tight ends, it feels like.
Right. I mean, I think about a guy like Chase Claypool back in 2019. Like, he was the last guy that I can remember. Ever since then, it's been kind of more of a patchwork wide receiver corps.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, they're often more reliant on their tight ends and their running backs in that offensive system. But I think Marcus Freeman's done a fantastic job. They go out and add a couple receivers from the portal. They get a Bo Collins from Clemson and a guy in Chris Mitchell from Florida International. We'll see how those additions pan out. They need probably one of those two to be kind of an impact guy right away. They have some younger guys they've recruited. I think Jaden Greathouse could be a breakout candidate for them. He showed some flashes as a freshman last year. They're going to need some receivers to take the next step, but I like where Notre Dame sits from a roster standpoint. I think the other thing that stands out to me about this ranking in particular, well, there are a couple of things, but Nebraska at number 22. People the casuals will say, well, how the fuck is Nebraska going to be ranked 22 in the country, and they can't win close games. They can't, they can't do this. They can't do that. Well, I would just caution you, even last year, they were a top 20 caliber defense in the country. That defense played really well last year. It kept them in games. And
Matt Rule knows how to coach college football, man.
he knows how to coach college football. Absolutely right. And now he's got the high caliber talent at the quarterback position. And a guy like Dylan Raiola, who transfers from Georgia, sitting behind Carson Beck for a year, thought he may get an opportunity to start at Georgia after this past year, ultimately goes to a place in Nebraska where you already have a pretty good infrastructure around you. I like some of the additions that they've made through the portal. And I think Dylan Raiola, as long as they can get rid of some of the mistakes from the quarterback position offensively, that will help them improve their offense, with that and that alone. And I think they've added some nice talent. And when you look at their schedule, I'll pull it up real fast, but I do believe they avoid a lot of the big dogs in the Big Ten next year. Of course, you're not gonna avoid all of them, but let me pull up their schedule real fast. When you look at this schedule, it's UTEP, Colorado, in Lincoln, which should be an interesting game, of course, with Dion. Northern Iowa at home, Illinois at home, Purdue on the road, Rutgers at home, Indiana on the road. They do have to go to Ohio State, and they have to go to USC, but they don't have to play Michigan. They don't have to play Oregon. They caught a good break. They don't have to play the caliber of schedule that maybe some of the other teams in the Big Ten play. So I just warn you, if they can flip a couple of those close games in their favor, they could absolutely win 8 or 9 games at the very minimum next year. And I don't think people really realize that.
Yeah.
Look, Iowa, in a way, probably deserves to get the benefit of the doubt because despite having a horrid offense, they always win 9 or 10 games in the Big Ten. Of course, the Big Ten's not getting any easier, but that's just a nicely run program. If they can be even average offensively, they could be right in range to potentially even make the playoff. I don't think that's outlandish. I'm surprised at how many Big 12 teams there are in this ranking now. Preseason rankings, as you mentioned, aren't everything, but you think about Kansas, a good program under Lance Leipold. They get their quarterback.
Jalen Daniels.
Right? Jalen Daniels coming back healthy next year. Arizona's a team who had a very nice year last year. They lost a good amount to the portal. They lose their head coach, Jed Fish. They lose Johnny Nansen, who goes to Texas. But they were able to keep Teatora McMillan, who's going to be a top receiver in next year's draft class. They were able to keep Takario Davis, who's going to be a first-round corner in next year's class. Their quarterback's going to be potentially a guy for next year to watch in the draft. I'm forgetting his name, but Arizona's still going to be, I think, a solid team in the Big 12 conference. They might not win 10 games like last year, but they'll be a solid program. K-State and Oklahoma State, Oklahoma State with Oklahoma now out of the conference, you don't have to – that's a game taken off your schedule. K-State's always been solid. Everything, with K-State is going to depend on how good of a passer Avery Johnson is. Can they figure out the quarterback position with Will Howard now at Ohio State? And then Utah at 6. I actually really like this ranking. I think it might be a little rich for my taste, just because, yes, they do have Cam Rising coming back, but he's been hurt a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's just there's still a
They
way.
lost a few guys on defense to the draft as well.
Yeah.
Jonah Ellis,
I don't know that I rank them above
Tony Vaki.
Michigan. I think ranking them above Michigan, the defending national champions, a program that's won the Big Ten Conference 3 straight years, ran the table last year, went undefeated, has their 2 best players on defense, three or 4 best players on defense coming back.
Yeah.
There's uncertainty at the quarterback position, but we know how physical they are, how good they are at running the ball, how good they are at developing talent. There's not really going to be any loss whatsoever in continuity within the program, even though Harbaugh left. They hired from within in Sharon Moore. It's still going to be the same offense. I wouldn't rank them above Michigan personally. I probably wouldn't even rank them above Alabama. I'd probably give those 2 programs a little bit of the benefit of the doubt over Utah, but I do think having Utah in the top 10 is fair. I do think I would have them 9 or 10. Penn State's an interesting one because remember, Penn State is a program that gets made fun of because, what does Josh Pate always say? They beat who they're supposed to beat, but they haven't been able to beat the teams that take them to the next level, right? From a really good program to a potentially elite program. They've had the talent. I think the question there lies in how good is Drew Aller going to become and who is he really throwing to? Because they did lose Keandre Lambert-Smith, who I thought was their best receiver last year. He transfers to Auburn. And so there's a proving ground that needs to happen with those wide receivers and the quarterback, but they have the defense. They have the coach that's basically won 10 games pretty much every year. He's just got to find a way to beat, a couple of the big dogs in the Big Ten. And I think this year, luckily for him, he doesn't have to play. It's either Michigan or Ohio State. I forget which one, but he avoids one of the 2 at least. So
yeah, I do want to say a quick piece on Utah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think, listening to Joel Klatt's podcast, I know why he did it. Joel Klatt loves him some Kyle Whittingham. I know that. Might even take it as far as to say that's full on man crush. He's huge fan of what they do over at Utah. But yeah, I would agree that I would probably put them down at probably 10 and probably move all those teams behind them up a slot. And I would even say I'd have Michigan maybe even up at 5, just because they are the defending national champs, and I think even with the questions at quarterback and with the new head coach and all the turnover, I do still think this team has a lot of the remnants of that national championship team still there, and until proven otherwise, I think you got to show them the respect in how you rank things. Obviously each year is its own individual thing, but that's just kind of how I see it. I think Michigan kind of deserves that championship bump, I guess. And then Texas A&M, man, I think they're super intriguing. I don't know how to feel about their new coach and it's his first year, and you don't want to raise the expectations on him too quickly. But Connor Wakeman, those receivers. I think this has the potential to be one of the best offenses in college football. Whether or not they'll, be adequate enough on defense is yet to be seen. But I definitely see them as the kind of team that can be almost like a LSU light from last year, like the LSU from last year that didn't play a lick of defense but could just score with anybody. I think they have the potential to be that type of team.
Yeah, I think the middle of the ranking is particularly interesting. You think about the ACC, right? It's still one of the Power Four conferences. They're adding a couple teams that shouldn't play too much of a factor into the college football playoff race nationally. But you think about Florida State, they're going to be 50 flavors of pissed next year with what happened to them this past year. They added really nice talent in the portal despite what they lost. I think they did a good job replacing a lot of it. To me, it just comes down to how good is DJU going to be? Because if he can play anywhere close to the level that Jordan Travis was playing at when he was healthy last year, Florida State is going to be probably the prohibitive favorite to win the ACC. The team that right now I'm kind of keeping my eye on really is Miami.
Yeah, I was going to mention them too.
I think, as Josh Pate said, if Cam Ward is what we think he is, that's a sleeping giant waiting to come out of the cave. And they could easily end up in the playoff next year. And remember, if you win the Power Four, if you win one of those leagues, if you win the Big 12, the SEC, the Big 10, or the ACC, you're a top 4 seed, and you have the bye. So it's highly advantageous for those teams, especially the teams in the ACC and Big 12. You're now highly incentivized to go win your league because then you don't have to play. You at least don't have to play the one extra game. So that stands out to me. And then finally, I want to see USC. I think Miller Moss could be a really nice piece for them at the quarterback spot. He showed what he could do at the end of last year, but we'll have to see it, against some of these rugged Big Ten defenses. But he absolutely has the talent, and we know Lincoln Riley's track record with quarterbacks. The key for USC is going to be how much are they improved defensively. And that's really what it comes down to. LSU and USC are kind of in the same boat. I think Garrett Nussmeier, they both have new young quarterbacks who I think are really talented, still have some proving to do, but they can be really good quarterbacks. They still have solid pieces, but both are going to need to improve significantly on the defensive side of the ball to be a national contender, in my opinion. But for USC, you still have Zachariah Branch. You still have a lot of the weapons. It's just with the upgrades that they made to their coaching staff defensively and the philosophy changes that they're trying to make there at USC, how much is that going to help?
Yeah.
It's basically the same thing for LSU. They overhauled their entire defensive coaching staff as well. So how much does that change things? And then lastly, I think the Texas OU A&M dynamic going into the SEC is going to be it's going to be it's going to be nuts. I don't even know how to kind of explain.
Yeah, and I'm excited to play Arkansas too.
Yeah.
You think of all the history with that. Think about, President Nixon handing, DKR the trophy back in I don't remember the year, but one of those national championship years in the 70s. There's a lot of history there, man.
Yeah. Eventually in the next couple of weeks, I want to do a segment where we rank. It's going to have something to do with Texas's schedule, first year schedule in the SEC, and we rank the most important games. Or we kind of ranked it'll be something to do with their schedule. But yeah, we'll continue to talk more about this starting as soon as Friday, which I think is when we're going to do our final dit hole that will carry you guys over into next week. I might do a solo dit hole next week. We'll have to figure that out, but it'll carry you over for a good amount of time into next week. We're going to be starting our transfer portal report cards, and we'll probably hit like 80% of the teams over the course of the next 2 months that you see on your screen right now, because a lot of them are very active in the portal.
Other than Clemson, of course.
Other than Clemson, yes. And then I know about most. I haven't really looked into what Oklahoma State maybe did or didn't do in the portal, or Kansas did or didn't do in the portal. But I know most of these teams went out and tried to get better in the portal. So I'm going to try to group it. We're going to try to hit 3 or 4 teams per episode. We're going to try to make it to where we're not only judging the talent that's coming in, but we're looking from a holistic perspective, and we're thinking about what went out in the portal, what they lost, what they brought in, and then what's ultimately the net result of that. What do we think the net result of that is? How many plug-and-play starters did these high-level programs get out of the portal, which is, I think, what will ultimately determine the grades that we give them. But we'll group them into like 3 or 4 team pods based on geography. It'll make sense to you guys. We're probably going to do Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and maybe LSU as one kind of episode. I mean, they're all in the same kind of region. Yeah. And then we'll probably do the Florida teams one episode. We'll do Florida State. We'll do Miami. We'll do Florida. We'll kind of just go around the country to a lot of the big programs. I'm excited for that. We'll also have some other stuff for you guys on Friday that I won't quite reveal to you guys yet, but thank you guys for tuning in. 7 people currently tuning in live, so thank you very much.
Yeah, appreciate that a lot.
I didn't even know, apparently, looking at the numbers, college baseball and college basketball portal stuff is hot on the streets right now for a certain group of people. But anyways, we'll see you guys on Friday. So enjoy the rest of your night. Enjoy your Thursday. Enjoy the NBA playoffs. We'll see you Friday evening for another great edition of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. We'll have potentially a live stream on Sunday, although I know it's Mother's Day. And we'll have our PGA Championship preview Monday or Tuesday. But until then, guys, have a great night. Hook 'em horns.